Hello, Body and Messiah. Today we're going to cover in lesson 12 of the Why, part 2, which is next to the last lesson in this lesson series called the Why, the whole house of Israel. This lesson is going to be titled, Who are the dry bones? Mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 37. But before we go over that prophecy and read it in detail, I want to cover 3 truths that we cannot depart from or see ourselves deflecting from, according to the Word of God, regarding the whole house of Israel. Truth number 1 that we have to hold true to is that the land space that is identified by the world standard as Israel today is not the land space of Israel that God promised to patriarch Abraham in the covenant he made with him in Genesis chapter 15. If you go back and look at one of the beginning lessons of the Why, I cover in detail how the land space and the boundaries that the world is calling Israel today does not fit for the land space and boundaries that Adonai gave patriarch Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. A few examples that will solidify that is the fact that one of the borders to the land space of Israel is the River Nile. The River Nile, it runs from Egypt all the way down through Sudan, going on down through Somalia, Ethiopia. It runs through a huge portion of Eastern Africa. And the other side of the border goes up and cuts through Saudi Arabia and parts of Syria. And what we see as the world's borders that they have defined by man's logic is not the Israel that God promised patriarch Abraham. Another fact that solidifies this, when you look at the origins based on history of the land space that is called Sudan today, based on the history of where Sudan got its name, So Yuda. I asked you in an earlier video to look up particular videos made by a man named Mr. Thomas Odimba, and he explains how Sudan got its name from So Yuda, So meaning land of, and Yuda meaning Judah. So we know that the land space of Israel, based on the world standard, is not corresponding and correlating with the promises that God made in his word in the Torah. If you want to go further and research this, and I want you to make a decision, you have to make the choice. When you look in Exodus chapter 3, verse 8, God is telling the descendants of Israel that they're going to inherit a land that is large and good. So you tell me, Body and Messiah, which Israel will you choose to believe in? The one that's based on the Torah and the Word of God and the covenant that Adonai Elohim gave patriarch Abraham, or the one that is based on the world standard? Now that's fact number 1. Fact number 2 is associated with facts that are associated with the Hebrew population. We know based on Genesis chapter 14, verse 13, that patriarch Abraham, based on history, in that particular verse is the first Hebrew mentioned in the Torah. He is the father of all the Hebrews. And also based on historically how the men during that time, they were given the responsibility of teaching their sons how to worship, how to proceed as a man and develop into a man that worships the Most High God. So it means all 8 patriarchs, Abraham's sons, from Ishmael, Isaac, Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua, would have been taught to be Hebrew based on history and based on everything that we see associated in Genesis, Exodus, based in the Torah, based in the book of Jasher, what Abraham, patriarch Abraham, would have taught his sons. We see that even Ishmael, that God honors the promises that he made to patriarch Abraham, as well as Isaac, as well as even Midian, as well as Esau's descendants. When we look in the book of Jasher, we can find in, I think it's like chapter 60, I don't know, 65 to 67, you'll see where even Zepho, who is a descendant of Esau, cries out to the Most High and reminds him of the promises that he made to Abraham and Isaac. So they all would have been taught to be Hebrew. Another fact about the ancient Hebrew is the fact that all of these descendants were based on an intermarrying of descendants of Ham, who are black and brown descendants, or descendants of Shem, who are black and brown, or an intermarrying of both. So the majority of the Hebrew people are black and brown people. We can see, based on this biblical heritage chart, you see Hagar, she was Egyptian, who was a descendant of Ham. The Egyptians came from the descendants of Mizraim, who are descendants of Ham. Sarah and Abraham, descendants of Shem. We see where Keturah, she was mentioned as being Syrian, is a descendant of Shem. Even if we go and we look further down, for example, a descendant of Midian that goes down 400 or 500 years later, we see where Moses, marries the daughter of a Midianite priest. The Midianite priest named Jethro, called Jethro, Reuel, his daughter Zipporah, is mentioned in Numbers chapter 12 that she was Ethiopian or Cushite. So we know all of these descendants, if you look further down in generations and generations, that they were black and brown people. Even the majority of the descendants of Esau. Esau, all of his wives that are here, all except one were descendants of Canaan, who are descendants of Ham. The only one who wasn't a descendant, a Canaanite, was Mahlah. She was Ishmael's daughter. And that means she was a descendant of a combination of Shem and Mizraim, an Egyptian, who was a descendant of Ham. So, body of Messiah, we can't deny this fact, can't deny this truth. And if you wrestle with that, as I've always said multiple times before, you have to go before the Most High and commune with Him if this is troubling to you. But all I'm doing is reiterating what we know based on the Torah, the Word of God, the first 5 books of the Bible, and including an apocryphal book called the Book of Jasher, which is mentioned in the Torah. Now as we move on, here's a third fact that we can't depart from or deny. When we look at the descendants of Israel, also known as Jacob, the descendants of Israel, they were all the ancient Israelites, black and brown people. When we look at these descendants of Israel, based on Leviticus chapter 13, when the priesthood had to try and identify what is called leprosy, it was identified by first seeing if there's a white spot or a white bump on their skin. And if this white spot began to expand, that's the way they were to identify leprosy. And if that's identified by a white spot, we know these descendants were not white, because it would be very hard to identify based on a white spot whether or not a person may possibly have leprosy. When we continue to look, once again, as I said, to historically, based on the curses that are mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 28, based on those curses, we know the majority of the household of Israel are descendants of Africans and descendants of African slaves. Because based on Deuteronomy chapter 28, the only people who match this history are descendants of Africans and African slaves. When you look throughout history, the only people who are in bondage in the way and the manner that Deuteronomy 28 prophesies are descendants of African and African slaves. It says in Deuteronomy 28 verse 46, Adonai Elohim said that this will forever be a sign to the descendants of Israel because of the idolatry that our ancestors had engaged in. So we cannot depart from these facts. Body of Messiah, you have to reconcile, because we've taught these lessons and shown over and over again these facts, and they should be solidified. For those of you who accept your heritage or first come into this knowledge of truth, I want you to go back and continue to research on your own if you're troubled by it. But for those of you who accept these facts, it's for you to hold on to the truth of Adonai's word, to follow his word wholeheartedly. For black and brown descendants, Hebrews, and descendants of Israel, it's for you. It's a calling for you to continue to teach your future generations the truth about who they are, and the truth about their heritage. So, body of Messiah, now we're going to come to the point we're going to cover a prophecy given in Ezekiel chapter 37. Ezekiel 37 is a prophecy about the dry bones. When we look at Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel, there's one thing about his name that I discovered that I thought was very interesting and heartwarming. The prophet Ezekiel, the name Ezekiel in Hebrew means God will strengthen. So as you listen to the narration of this particular chapter of Ezekiel, we're not going to read the entire chapter, but what is very pivotal and important to understanding what this prophecy is about, I pray that Adonai Elohim will strengthen you in your mind, your body, and your ruach, your spirit. So, body of Messiah, hold on as we get ready to hear the narration of Ezekiel chapter 37.
The hand of Adonai was upon me. The rock Adonai carried me out and set me down in the middle of the valley. It was full of bones. He led me all around them. Behold, there were very many on the floor of the valley. Behold, they were very dry. Then he said to me,
Son of man, can these bones live?
Adonai Elohim, you know.
Prophesy over these bones. Say to them, dry bones, hear the word of Adonai. Behold, I will cause ruach to enter you, so you will live. I will attach tendons to you, bring flesh onto you, and cover you with skin. Then I will put breath in you. You will live, and you will know that I am Adonai.
So I prophesied, just as I was commanded. As I prophesied, there was a noise, an earthquake. Then the bones came together, bone to its bone. I saw, and there were tendons on them. Flesh came up, and skin covered them above, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me,
Prophesy to the ruach. Prophesy, son of man. Say to the ruach, come from the four winds, ruach. Breathe upon these slain, that they may live.
So I prophesied, just as he commanded. The ruach came into them, and they lived. They stood up on their feet, a vast army.
Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, our hope is lost. We are cut off by ourselves. Therefore, prophesy and say to them, behold, I will open up your graves. I will bring you up from out of your graves, my people. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. You will know that I am Adonai when I have opened up your graves and brought you up from out of your graves, my people. I will put my ruach in you. You will live. I will place you in your own land. Then you will know I, Adonai, have spoken, and I have done it.
Now that you know who you are, body of Messiah, I pray that you will keep your focus on worshiping Adonai Elohim in ruach and in truth. Just as John chapter 4 verse 24 says, worship him in spirit and in truth. From this day forward, I hope and pray that you're able to commune with Adonai more often. I pray that you hold on to the truth of his whole word. And I pray that you teach your future generations who they are and who they are according to the word of God. Later on in this last lesson of the WHI, lesson 3, of the whole house of Israel. I'm going to share with you scriptures that I pray will help you keep your focus on the creator of the universe and communing, reconnecting, and staying connected with him. Well, this is the end of lesson 12, part 2. I hope and pray that you will join me for the next lesson. But until then, may Adonai Elohim cover you and bless you with his shalom peace. Goodbye, mighty Messiah.